So, since it's Chodesh Elul, we're starting to do tshuva. And we have the whole discussion. We should care about the fact after Chodesh Elul, maybe it's childish to be busy with these holidays, which is what we've been discussing. So I want to say something about children.
Well, it's called Masechah Savos, right?
What?
It's called Masechah Savos.
Masechah Savos, very good. Is the father, very interesting. Is the fathers, not Masechah Yiluvim. Like if a Hantag Yid would write a Mussar book, which like the Rambam tries to frame it as like the ethics for life, it would for sure be called Chinuch Yiluvim. How to teach your children, and this is about like
How to be a father.
Well, we always like say it's the sayings of the father. I'm not sure why it's even called Lowy. Nobody doesn't like have an explanation. But yeah, it's important to be the father. And the point is, oh gosh, give me a second, I have to look this up. Back to where I am. I'm sorry. I was saying something about children. Oh gosh, what were you saying? We should just say that there's a problem that adults don't get anything out of holidays. Yamim Tovim, Heiligim Tovim. And it's a thing for kids. And it probably is. And the main holiday is Pesach, and it says like in the Siddur that it's for little children. It's a mitzvah even if you're an adult. I feel like okay, I feel it. But like the Pashtus is not. And it's probably the same for Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot also. In Lemanya the Deresech, and there's also the same kind of language in Sefer Dvurim that we're reading. It's all about teach your children. So then the Shala is the Kotzker Rebbe's Shala or whoever. Like what are we getting to the last child? Like what's the point of it? I actually think Uriah Imbal likes to say that he's misnagid lechalitin. He's very against talking about Yom Tovim. He says that anyone that wants the drusha of Kavod Yom Tov, he doesn't want to hear anything you have to say. If you want someone to make a matzah for Yom Tov, okay, so I'll hire a musician. What I have to tell you a drusha or song? You're making tzudus of me. You want to share about Pesach? No problem. Why does it have to be on Pesach? There's a sugi of Pesach. I can teach it to you on Chol Hamoed Sukkot Sochet. Well, what's it got to do? You don't want to share anything. You just want, let's see your baby. Serious. You need a song. Someone sing a song. Part of the minutes. You didn't do it. Okay, I'll say it's right. Okay, come on. And I found the meeting, and where's the meeting? Thinking it's like one of his Agdamas. It's like, people learn only Hilchas Moed. They only learn Hilchas Chag B'Chag. It seems like they hold that Torah is mitzvah is man grandma. Because everyone wants to know Hilchas Chag B'Chag. But that's not. So that's one thing. In other words, that's something that I often talk about in my classes. That it's not really about that. If there's like a logic, if there's like a reasoning behind the Yom Tov, then it's eternal reasoning. It's not the Torah today. If it's only all the Chassidish drushes and like stuff like today it's such a gula, that's nonsense. That's not nonsense. It's for babies, which we're somewhat at, and maybe we have children and all of that. But it's not serious. I think that's fine. But then, it's true the changing of the seasons is an important thing, not for us urban people where the real things happen, as we discussed. But then there's this thing where, so I want to talk about this. So I want to say something about this. So that's to do with happiness. So I saw today, I was reading the Aristotle about happiness, which is what the ethics, the politics are about. And it's also what the Yom Tovim are about. I'm never sure, but I gave a class about this once before in Sukkot, I remember. That probably the Rambam's making Simcha into such a big thing, which is not really in the pshat of the Torah. And maybe it's still about Yom Tovim and things like that. Again, I said to Tzvirim, you have to talk about Simcha. And I thought that this probably has to do with Aristotle's focus as the eudaimonia, right? On happiness or flourishing or osher. How do you say osher in English? I don't know.
Well, being.
Like ashrei, osher.
Yeah.
Glik. miles, I don't know.
Musharim.
Yeah.
That were
fulfilled.
No.
The Jewish tradition often translated eudaimonia as Osher. And he made this into a big thing, and it probably has to do with this Greek thing of seeing like the good, right? The human good is happiness. That's Aristotle's big thing. That's the final good. He has a whole derusha about why we should get to this. Whole first book of the Ethics is about explaining that, and therefore that's virtue is that. But now, one of the nice things, and there's a lot, right? And we say the problem we have with happiness is that we tend to think that it's a feeling. In other words, in Aristotle's language, a state, right? Something that you have, right? Or you're in a state, something that you have or something you're in. And that is something very much not what he thinks that happiness is, and very much not what he thinks the thing that is or brings the different problem happiness is, which is what he calls what's his line? Activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. Right? And he makes this explicit that he's saying this other than other people, which have other people have noticed that happiness is the end, and other people have noticed that virtue is the end, but they often talk about virtue as if it's something you have. But that can't be. And he has a whole bunch of like arguments or illustrations or rhetoric, maybe some proof also.
Have versus being in accordance with?
Versus doing, versus activity, actuality.
Okay.
Activity, doing. Unlike what the Buddhists tell you that you should stop doing, you should be, Aristotle is all about stopping to be and doing. I don't know if this really corresponds because it's different people speaking different language or different metaphysics behind them, but mamish like the opposite. Like no good Aristotelian would agree with all these like Myron Drushis about be here now, act here now, right? Like Shabbos, that's where they literally, there's the Rambam about this, that you can't interpret Shabbos as rest in the sense of be and don't do. There must be a doing or a better doing, which the rest is. Leisure is a way of doing the correct things or the better thing or the things that you really want to do, but doesn't mean not doing. And he has a bunch. Did we go through this once? I don't remember. He has a bunch of different things about this. One of them, or like one fundamental one, is that since we're looking for the human good, right? And one of our methodologies for looking for the human good is to find out what are the things that are most specifically human, right? This is like an argument. This is the function argument, which works like this. And Plato has a version of an argument that works like this, and we have to think about it, how this argument really works. But the argument goes that if there's something that humans do and cats do also, obviously humans aren't for that. Although humans need that, they're not for that. Right? And everything is for the thing that it most specifically does. This is sort of a logic that we can see human tools, which is where it starts with, have this logic, right? A hammer has density and gravity and all kind of things, but if it's shaped in a specific way, if you find some weird hammer that's specific, it has a claw in the back of it, it gets thinner and thinner as it goes by on, and you say, like, why is this? And you can say, well, you could bang a nail in with it. Well, you could, but that's not what it's for. That's not why it's this way. It's this way so you can take the nail out with it, right? Because otherwise, you could technically go to bang a nail with a seltzer bottle, but seltzer bottles are not hammers, and therefore it would be incorrect to say that's what they're for. Although, like, what happens if I use it in the wrong way? Nothing will happen. It's sort of like part of it becomes extra, part of it becomes superfluous, right? If I have the back claw side of the hammer and I'm using it to knock a nail in, then I'm not really using it. You could say something like that. I'm using it as a piece of metal or as some heavy thing, but I'm not using it, right? That's the one. And in the same way, and you could stop me if it doesn't make sense. And in the same way, but you agree with all these theories. In the same way, if we see a human being eating and growing by eating and moving and having sense perception, and all these things are things that not only human beings do, because even plants eat and grow by eating.
What would we say according to this scheme that let's say, animals are for. Not to jump ahead too far, but...
No, animals are for being animals. That's fine.
Right, and being an animal, what does that mean?
Oh, whatever most specific thing of an animal is.
Right. I'm saying is like moving around.
Yeah, and using sense perception. Animals are for watching movies, according to Aristotle and Plato. Because animals also like to watch interesting things. So they also have take pleasure in sense perception, do they? I guess.
And is there any way that we order, let's say, the unique things that something does? Something could do more than one unique thing.
I think that I don't know if there's to be more than one unique thing. That's always in the first book, which is the one that I've read. Meanwhile, he keeps on equivocating. He keeps on saying the one good or one of the goods. We didn't yet decide that there's one thing. Ultimately, he does think there's one thing, but and the Rambam definitely always assumes that there's only one thing, and that is for this kind of arguments where there ends up to be only one really specifically human thing.
And I'm guessing that if we look at, let's say, higher levels of organization, we're not just looking at what something uniquely does, but also what that might be as a part of something else. Like if there's a higher organizational principle, let's say we can imagine and we can also think, right? But we would call thinking superior to imagining because let's say imagining is in the service of thinking, or
but that would be
it's a misuse of thought.
Another argument where one thing can be for the other thing and the other thing can't be for that, which shows what's prior or what's
right. But I'm saying we're doing this in some sense with our animal functions as well, right? By saying that
this is a different argument. I think there's two different arguments. One is saying that a thing is most what it's entirely specific.
What it most uniquely does, right?
Uniquely or specifically does. This is literally it's even like the way that he Aristotle basically invented the classification of animals and everything into classes and specific species, which means something like specification. Species and genus, which is the thing that you specify. And when he ends up Plato already worked with this kind of framework, but when we end up saying things like man is a rational animal, right, which is a genus and a species, and animal is the genus, and rational is the specific thing that he is, or the differentiation, then the rational is what is uniquely or specifically human, and the animal is what is shared with all animals. And we have this discussion if the animal of the human is the same as the animals or not. We had that discussion, but in any case, the only really human thing is a specifically human thing. So that's the argument from what it is specifically. It's also true, right? There's another argument when you can say okay, but maybe, I'm not sure if there's a need for the other argument now, but the other argument. What you're saying is another argument which would say something like, humans can't think without eating, or nothing. Actually, angels could think without eating, but humans can't think without eating. Which means that the eating can be, or not necessarily, but can be for thinking. But vice versa is not true.
Right.
We don't have any mortal thing that can think without. It's actually never true. There's never anything that thinks in order to eat.
Right.
In the abstract.
The thing is, but how we get to this idea of that what's unique about something is what's privileged about it is partially by the same method. Meaning, what we're saying is that because there are other things that do this but don't do this, and this does all these things plus something else, means that. Right.
So what this is what it's specifically.
Right. Not only that, but only if it works in some sense, this is seen as not just superfluous, but that the other things also are kind of supported underneath it, right?
If there would be just
human beings are the only ones that stand on two legs, right? Does that mean that the reason why we eat is to stand on two legs?
Right. I get what you're saying. What you're saying is, if someone would say, yes, there's the unique thing, and maybe there's 10 random unique things, and depending on how we cut up the world, we could end up with a long list of unique things. I don't know, humans are the only species that laughs. So Aristotle has that idea.
But it has to be unique on the top and not on the side or bottom.
Humans are the only ones that laugh. And he still doesn't think that's what defines a human being.
Right.
That just equals that a specific property, or he has a word for these kinds of things. But it's not what makes a human being. And why is that? Maybe that's because of what you're saying, which is that there isn't any way of explaining all the other things as being for laughing, although maybe there is. But okay.
Or at least tending, or at least being able to be organized in a causal way underneath it.
Could you say that like you eat and you think in order to make jokes, in order to laugh? Well, not really true. Humans are unique in all kinds of ways. I mean, I don't know, there's a specific kind of skin, or a specific kind of DNA, or a specific kind of, let's just assume that there's 10,000 different things that no other animal has. But then he like always like says, well, this is the way he describes it in places, like this is not the essential thing about a human being. There's a difference in the essential thing. This is true, it's an accident, it's a property, and it's even unique, but there's difference to unique properties and the essential properties, which is what makes him what he is.
Right, I mean, in some sense, you can even say that laughing is because we have humor, which is maybe an accident of thinking.
Right. The thing that he would usually say before what you're saying is something like definitional kind of thing, which is like, you can imagine, let's assume that humans are the only bipedal species, they stand upright on two legs, besides for penguins and whatever.
Right.
But anyways,
we're not that impressed by them.
Let's assume that it's in some way true. We'll figure out how exactly to make a difference to humans and penguins and birds, like the famous guy that came and said that the bird is a... Diogenes
rooster.
Yeah, that's Plato's man and so on. Featherless biped. Then we'll figure out how to get away from that stupid problem, right? That's a joke, but we'll figure out how to get away from that. And Aristotle will say, well, I can imagine something that has 3 feet and is still a human.
Right.
Seems to be passable. What I can't imagine is something that doesn't think I'm still a human. Of course, if you're very like...
Or an animal who could think who would still stay just an animal.
Yeah, in other words, that's what I'm... But as you say, like, who told you, Aristotle? That's what we decided. I know some humans that don't think. Many of them would like say, well, are you sure? I think that all humans think. That's Aristotle's thing. Plato would say, well, yeah, they're not humans. They're given for animals. Those are 2 different ways of answering that problem.
But also doesn't seem to be something that makes... Right, like compositionally, you don't imagine like...
So that's what he usually think, that this is what makes it and that doesn't make it. But it's possible, maybe we could use what you're saying also, I'd say that we could sort of understand this as everything being for it, or everything in the human being ultimately enabling or being conditions of that, and it's not vice versa. And then there's all kind of random things which are maybe not conditions of anything, like laughing or like having...
Right, meaning what we're explaining first is...
Having here in certain places or whatever.
Are we also in some ways explaining... Like in a way of explaining thought require like a new organizational principle for it versus, let's say, laughing. It doesn't seem like we need any kind of like species or genus of it to understand
he might think
laughing.
That also. What does have to do with the separation of these things? When we talk about the soul, it's more interesting over there. Where we have to get back to our ethics, because in some sense we get to ask questions of psychology, of the theory of the soul, which according to Aristotle is not entirely important, they're only partially important. What I wanted to get back to was, okay, but we have this idea, we have this like specificity idea, and I think it makes sense. Is it like airtight? I don't know. It sort of makes sense that whatever something is specifically is what it is mostly, or what is most essential. And like you said, we have to add some qualification to this, and like we don't mean any random specific thing. We don't mean things that we don't mean things that nothing would be taken away from the substance, from what it is if you lose them, or things that are not, maybe that's the same thing, things that are not organized, that not everything in that thing would be organized towards or under, or things that don't require some new kind of, this kind of levels of organization is not a classic concept, right? It's not something that he would say, but we would say things like that. That's not like a new...
The blueness of the box doesn't make it deserve a new explanatory category,
it's not like
right?
a new kind of cause, or not like a new kind of form, or something like that. It's the same form. Yeah. Okay. But the important thing now is less here. What I wanted to get to is that this kind of argument also leads him to say that, therefore, we need to also, when we're thinking specifically in the humans, right, in the things that humans have or do or create, 3 different kinds of things, or like finding the good or the happiness, and we want to know which one it is, that it must be the one that is most specifically human in that. Now, since humans obviously have a bunch of things shared, so those things are not, right? So the human good is not in the nutritive soul, it's not things that have to do with nutrition, because that's good. The human needs it. He doesn't deny that you need that to be human, but it's not the human good. So it's not happiness, because happiness is a condition or an activity of the soul specifically, and the soul means what makes you a human soul, not what is, right? Not you as a machine that works or as a living body. Right. So this is why food is not the good of life, not the good. It's a good, not the good. Right, we go through other things, but this is one thing we know, that eating, same thing with reproduction, sex isn't the best thing in life. How do we know? Because animals do it. Now, another interesting thing, so now we could think of something like this. Now, when people sleep, this is the argument from sleep. When people sleep, are they people? They obviously, so here we get into the distinction of having and doing, right? Obviously, when someone sleeps, a person, we can even think of like when a good person, an ideal person sleeps, is he a good ideal person? Well, he is, in other words, I didn't become poor while I slept, I didn't become stupid while I slept, I didn't become evil while I slept. Those things would sound very weird to say, it would be wrong. But it's still true that sleeping is sort of the state of humans being the least human. And Aristotle says it like this: when you sleep, all your animal functions work. Which is why we digest in our sleep, and maybe even better than we do when we're up. Sort of the thinking is, the human is sort of clashing with that. That's not exactly what he says, but could think of that. People digest better in their sleep because their whatever systems that we consider more conscious nowadays and more human are take up less energy. That's probably a physical way of explaining it. And that's number one. Even the imagination works in sleep, which is what we call dreams. But what doesn't work in sleep, obviously, is, well, the rational activity doesn't work in sleep. You don't think when you're sleeping. Nobody does. Even good people, even philosophers, they dream, maybe they have good dreams, but they don't sleep, they don't think. And also, in Morse, so this is like another, I'm showing you that sleep is not the best condition. That you might be enjoying yourself while sleeping. No, he's not saying that sleep is painful, but the goal isn't to do whatever you're doing when you're asleep. Because that's literally the animal or nutritive state of the human body, of the human soul. That's what he does. What he does when he sleeps is, one way to describe sleep is to say sleep is where your nutritive soul is active and not your rational soul. Then Aristotle, on sleep, whatever it's called, this book on sleep, has these kind of descriptions. Not even the intermediate soul, but we'll get to that. Now, but a more specific way of saying this is to say that when you sleep, you don't do anything. Again, you as the human soul, because even if we say that, okay, obviously your digestion system is doing something, but we don't care about that because that's not the human soul. And now if we talk about the human soul, right, where morality, where ethics and thought live, right, which are the two higher parts of the soul, where we think ethics are relevant. Those parts, I still have them, right? I didn't die when I'm sleeping. Or we could say I'm sort of dead, 1 out of 60. I'm not dead. But I'm not doing them, right? So the problem with sleep, and the reason why sleep is sort of our example, our pattern, our source for thinking of what is not the human happiness, is because sleep is the exact state when you have everything, but you're not doing anything. That makes sense? Right? So even the most happy man is not happy when he's asleep. Even if he has all the things that give him happiness. He has wisdom, even he has virtue. He has Kolshkin that he has money and he has. And Aristotle quotes a Greek saying that said that for half of their life, the happy people and the miserable people are the same. Meaning when they're sleeping. And of course, this is only halfway true because people have nightmares and so on, but in some sense, sleep is the great equalizer. You know, when I'm sleeping and when the king is sleeping, we're both just sleeping. And precisely because it's an equalizer like this, it's an equalizer because it's the state which ignores all doing. Doesn't no, it's not entirely equal, like we said, because you still have the potential, you still have things. But you're not doing anything. So this becomes like a very big source for showing how what we're looking for is not a having. And having is in Aristotle language called a potential, right? Or a hexis, a potential or power. Levels of potential. But no level of potential is ultimately can be happiness. Because that you can do when you're sleeping. And nobody says that when you're sleeping you're happy. You know, there's the Chassidish story that said that on Shabbos you shouldn't sleep. Or some Chassidish even that tried not to sleep on Shabbos. Why? Because like I'm saying, they didn't understand that Shabbos is rest in the being sense. Because obviously they're good Aristotelians. And they understood that of course Shabbos must be the best activity, but the best activity. And they said that Napoleon used to sleep very little. And he was asked why don't you sleep? He said, when I'm sleeping I'm not Napoleon. And it's a shame. And that's a very, very good, and of course he was a man of action, so that you could be in, but like we say, intellect is an activity, so you can be a man of intellect and say, I'm not thinking when I'm sleeping. But that's the idea. Very important idea. And Aristotle thinks this is missing from many other accounts of happiness. And this is like his big idea. And this is how this connects to activity, which is actuality, which is happiness is a doing and not a being. It's the good life is an activity, being active. Now, and it's also something that us, for some reason, for whatever value of us, tend to miss this part. Like we always, I think this has to do with the children, this is where I'm getting back to the children thing. We tend to miss this part, we tend to think, for some reason, first that we have this psychology that sort of thinks of states as the most perfect or most whole part of the human. Like I'm in a state, I have a feeling or something like that, and you're never doing the feeling. And feeling by definition is a passive thing, right? We say I'm moved, which means I'm not the mover. And that is some kind of having. Or even, weirdly, even when we talk about the good, right? Even the good of us, we talk about Musa, we talk about, am I a tzaddik? There's no such thing as being a tzaddik. You have to do a tzaddik. Or do tzidkas, or being a lamb, like I... And Aristotle had this thing also, he said, and this is the source of the Chaim Briskus, tell you that a lamb is not someone that knows how to learn, but someone that learns. And Aristotle said, in the Olympics you don't get the prize for
knowing how to do it.
For being the best athlete. You get the prize for running the fastest. Yeah. Or for being the most beautiful. Whatever it is they give prizes for, you have to do it. But what we're trying to get at is that the doing, so a state of happiness is a state of doing. It's not a state, it's an activity, it's not a state.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about a world where the Olympics would just be if you have enough technology to assess a person's ability to jump the highest, and then It
seems like some people have a theory of the Olympics which is like that.
That the running is just to show who can run the fastest.
It's just proof, right? It's like a person of Nisayan, right? We say I've run a Nisayan of that guy. That's all. It was to prove. It's just reading out there that now I know that you were. But in Aristotle, and actually, if you read the Look in the Ramban, and
now I know that you are.
And it's not really now I know, because I have the question, what do you mean now I know? God would have known before. God obviously is the thing that has that machine that you want them to have. So why does he have to do the test? The point is that no, because we need knowing when, however we interpret God. No, this atiyadati as some.
What's worth knowing is when you that you did it, not that you.
Knowing is not literal. It means has what. Because when they say when God says now I know something, what that means is that now
it is to be known.
The thing has come to be, and clearly he knows because he knows everything.
Right.
So it's not that he didn't know before. He knew that it will be.
Now
before,
it's knowable.
But now it's knowable. maybe by God in the future we have this problem. But the point is, now it exists, and which means that before that it didn't exist. Before Avram did that kind, he was not the kind of relikim. He was potentially, so maybe he had the ability, which is just another way of saying could do it, but he didn't do it. And couldn't do it is gunish. That's not happiness. That's not human perfection. Yeah, that's the shot.
Is there ever a level of potentiality that directly corresponds to its, let's say, actual counterpart, like 100%? Or is this idea that potential states, the difference between potential states and actual states is still a certain level maybe of risk or possible inability for the potential to be actualized?
No. I mean, I think we get into problems where, like, does every potential have to be actualized?
Obviously not, right?
Because that's the point of it being a potential.
The potential for this piece of wood is...
In other words, it's not the same question as determinism. In other words, if
no, I'm not asking it deterministically. I'm saying it's a property of potentiality that it may not come to be.
I think so. And at least in the way he usually understands it, this leads to some problems. But that's why it does lead to problems with determinism. But I think that usually, in other words, we can make distinctions. We have to look into metaphysics about this. We can start making distinctions of like different levels of potentiality. But the problem with potentiality isn't the point of...
I know it's not central to it.
Is not how do we know what's going to happen or...
No, I just mean that is it a characteristic of potential that, let's say, this ati thing. I'm not saying that it's central. I mean that...
for sure happen tomorrow. It's still potential because that's the thing that explains that it could happen tomorrow. That it will happen, even that it will happen tomorrow.
Right. I mean, I don't mean to take away...
even exists after when it's happened.
And I don't mean to take away... I don't mean to take away the fact that activity is what makes something go from potential to actual and not the level of possibility that this event will be engendered. I mean that, is it just either way, just a characteristic of potentiality itself that it could not come to be actualized? Or that the same set of circumstances may or may not actualize this potential?
No, I don't think so. I think there definitely are, I mean, it might be hard, there might be some conclusions from those kinds of things, if there are such kind of things. But I think that the basic theory or the basic metaphysics is always that
activity is what separates the potential from being actualized, right? Activity. There's two things that make something go from potential to actual: circumstance and activity, right? Mostly activity, but in some circumstance might allow certain activities to take place.
No. Well, yeah, but or different. But you're always going to need a goal and
a cause,
and
right?
An active cause, whatever.
Right, efficient cause.
But you're right. But even let's say we have some kind of world or some state where it's set up that it will happen. The problem that it's not.
You still need an activity to actualize what's potential.
Yeah, even maybe that's necessary activity, so it always happens or so on. But we can still talk about potential and actual.
And actual in that sense.
Still will say that the actual is the wholeness.
Physics, mechanical physics understands this.
I'm not sure if it's the same because
I think there's a distinction between what's potential and what's kinetic.
Yeah, I know, but in I think that in physics the potential goes away when you have an actual. When it's actualized, and actual never goes away. I'm
not sure is that always the case?
Weird.
That potential is eliminated when something's kinetic?
I think usually that's how I understand, but I don't know. Okay, I don't know. But I want to make it practical. Practically, we have to do tshuva, not be tshuva. Anyways, I really think that this doing thing solves a lot of issues. We already did a class about this once in New Central Avenue. With what?
Vididvarim. You can't just think it. Even the thinking is an activity, but...
Yeah, and having changing habits and so on. I mean, based in some sense, this whole Protestant, Hasidic, whatever movement, internalization movement, is a movement away from activity and towards states, or towards things that you have. And I'm not saying that that's really how it should be understood, but it gets read that way many often. Like tshuva is about feeling something, but it's not. It's about doing something. And when I say doing, it sounds like I'm saying, you're saying chatzonius. Nothing chatzonius about that. There's nothing external. External, and the difference in external and internal is what you're doing it to. You can be doing it to yourself, or you can do it to something outside of your body or outside of your soul. That's a different question. It's the opposite, right? Aristotle says that the best activity is the activity of the soul. Meaning to say, because we should read the whole first book in order, and you'll see all these things. But meaning to say, if the activity is making something, right? Creativity, an art, I'm making something, I'm making a table, then the table is better than me in some sense, because the end is something outside of me, an external thing. And we have another criteria for our happiness, which is that it should be complete, which is that it shouldn't need anything else. It should be the last thing, or the final thing. And therefore, this is where he says, therefore, the happiness we're looking for is not a creating. It's a doing, which stops by the doing. Right? Something more like playing a game than making a house. And this, he said, this is what the ancients meant when they said that the good is the good of the soul and not of the body. Because it ends in you and doesn't end. So that's I think also what people say when I mean pneumius and not chatzonius and so on. Chatzonius is the word for things which are better than you. Masiyah liv mavalamus. If I create something, then the thing is stronger than me in some sense, or better than me. But anyways,
because it's what this activity was attempting to perfect or
right,
actualize.
I'm making a shoe, so it's not the making. It's in some sense I would say
the making of the shoe is evaluated by the shoe.
Right, the making is only valuable because of making the shoe, and the shoe is better. If I could have had the shoe without the making, I would have gotten the shoe without the making, which means that the making is definitely not. Being a shoemaker is definitely not the best thing in the world, or being anything maker. It's being a doer. So that's another distinction between making and doing. We have a distinction between being and doing, or a distinction between making and doing. And we're again by the doing.
But it's doing something. It's where the doing is not aimless, but
not aimless.
doesn't
itself.
Right. Okay.
Self-aimed. It's not even. And we could think about it. Sometimes we have such language. Is it if it's self-creation? Another weird modern terminology is self-creation. So since we have this picture where making things is the best thing, humans are essentially makers, they're never doers, pure doing or pure thinking, which is a kind of pure doing. There's always something better than you that you're working on. And then I say, no, you should work on yourself. And then you're the object and the subject and the active doer, efficient cause, so to speak, of the activity, of the best kind of activities.
But it still seems to only be intelligible to itself if it's
intelligible
if it creates.
If it's a creation, right? When you declare it as if it's a creation, and it's very weird that the people being so messed up spiritually, psychologically, because a human being is not an object to be worked on. You should never work on yourself. Work on yourself is the internalization of the capital of the doing,
capitalist.
Of the creating. Capitalist is creating, right? Of the creating mindset and the spiritualization of that. And you shouldn't think of things like that. You should think of, in some sense it's true, that's what I'm saying, it's complicated. You do find such languages in tradition. In some sense it's true, you could say things like working on yourself to create virtue.
Being action.
We could say you create virtue in yourself by habit, by habituation. People say things, language like that, but they're not, the better way of thinking of it is at least ultimately, right, when we're not just practicing, when you're actually doing the good, is that it's not creating yourself, it's acting, which is the actualization of the yourself, of the potential that you have and so on, but it's not working on yourself as if there's a third thing. There's me and the work and on myself. That's a weird way of thinking. And it's not only weird, I think it ends you up in a lot of loops and it ends you thinking of yourself.
And it also forces you to think of this activity as an activity towards the creation of something external to itself.
The activity becomes not the best thing because it's towards a product, and the product is yourself. So first, the word problem is that you become a product, which, I don't know, is not good, because a product is, again, something that you have. Even if I have, then there's a fourth thing where I have that. Then you don't have, do you have?
What does the person before the action get the product that he created before he created it?
Who owns it, so. And that's one problem. And the second problem is that you're like, how did I say it? That you're not happy. Because remember, happiness is the state where you're doing the final thing. That's really what happiness is. I think this is very much not just, even though we keep on saying that happiness is not a feeling, and therefore, all the happiness.
So the self-creation theory is a total misdirection of the best activity.
It seems like,
right.
Again, if you criticize it like this.
By making it into production.
Right, and I'm saying it's also the problem that you're not happy, and that's why the people that are doing that are always sad, because they're like breaking the best thing. And they're like, instead of having the best thing being a doing, which is a doing that doesn't have anything after it, right? This is the thing I want to do with my life. And that's actually when people are happy, when they do the thing they want to do with life. So this is where this theory of what I call objective happiness is really also what we call subjective happiness. Although when all the subjective happiness studies, which are asking people and censuses, are you happy? And then drawing all kind of weird conclusions from that. That's definitely not what I mean, because that just, are you happy? Well, I know I'm taking a shower. What do you mean I'm happy? Are you happy? Well, no, I'm changing my child's diaper. What does that mean? Right? And we can see right away that it's a bad question to ask. Do you feel joy? Sometimes, but that's not the same thing as happy, right? But if you say, are you happy, as in, are you living your best life? Right? Which is what Aristotle says, everyone agrees that happiness is living your best life. Even we sort of agree to that, even though we say that we're psychologists. And then we can understand very easily that the real happiness, in other words, when are you really happy?
And the question is not if you're feeling your best feelings.
Right, and when you're doing that, is when you're happy. And there can be the very style of doing. Doing doesn't mean work. It doesn't have to be, struggle. Struggle is actually another thing that's not happiness. Because struggle is a word for when you're doing something that you don't want to be doing. But when you're doing something you do want to be doing for itself, right, and that's the only things that you want to be doing, because everything else you'll be happier, right? Making money people like to make money, but actually zero people enjoy making money, are happy with making money. This is an objective statement, right? It's also a subjective statement because people are built like that. Because money by definition is a means. That's just what the word money means. That's how it works.
Some people might enjoy the making of the money more than the money itself.
Yeah, but then...
It's still an activity that aims towards something else that's not internal to itself, but
so
it's not a direct...
The happiness is when you count your money? Is it when you... There must be something. So that's a doing... Okay, maybe that's the best thing to be doing is to rescrolling your bank account and think that it's full. Then you could say that, but that's not making money. Anyways, so the best thing is to be doing something. The best thing is to be doing something, and that's actually when people are happy. And usually the answer to most people that are depressed is to do things that they like. And for some reason, all the psychologists never figure this out, because there's still, some people, I'm not saying there are, what we call clinical depression is really depression is not a problem of the soul, it's sort of a problem of the body. But, medrash, which was literally, traditionally seen as a problem in the body, not in the soul. But, if you very often it still means that you're not doing the things that are good in themselves.
Well, it's funny because the diagnostic criteria is almost reversed. The way you diagnose it is if someone does not do the things that they like.
Right, but that's as if it works backwards, but really it works this way.
Right.
Or most of it, in healthy human beings, it should work this way. Maybe not saying if someone has a problem, then.
So the issue is with maybe, let's say, something that reaches clinical threshold is that you can't enter into the circle because you don't want to do the things that you like.
Maybe there's something more basic that's broken.
Yeah.
But if you would be happy, you would. Well, if I would do it, I would be happy. And not I would be happy. Like ourselves, it's not I would be happy. That is what happy is. I wouldn't afterwards be happy. I would be complete in that kind of activity while doing it. Yeah, this is all why. Another thing, then that's what I was said about the children. Here, where was it? There was a word about children. Here. Another thing is that the question that children are happy. In chapter 9, or somewhere. In chapter 9 it said, children are never happy. It's a very weird statement for us who have a messed up understanding of happiness. For this reason, the child is not happy either, since he is not yet capable of performing such actions on account of age. He's just too young to do anything. Do children do anything? Well, they do a lot of things, but they're not, like we said earlier, they're not really doing anything, right? What they do makes no difference. They're just playing. And they can't, since really doing means, at least here, having a political life, acting in society, or maybe acting in intellect, but acting, playing with your toys is not activity. Why not? Maybe for their level it is, but not for the human level it is. I'm not sure what it is. Because I would think maybe playing with language is an activity. But Aristotle says that since happiness is a kind of being at work, right? This is how this person translates.
Most of childhood play is imitating being an adult.
So it's practice for something else.
Yeah.
So because of this, a child is not happy. This is amazing because us children, us nostalgic holiday people, I talked about we should learn from children how to be happy, all kinds of such toivelach. And we all think, when I was a child I had happy on the toilet, and we should be like that. And Aristotle just comes and says, well, children are not happy. So and then just to realize that he's not entirely crazy, and then he goes and says, well, so why do we call children happy sometimes? He says, yeah, that's like a wish. We're saying, we hope that when he grows up, he'll be happy. In the same way he says, a horse is never happy. A horse is happy? No, because they don't do any human activities. And happiness is a word for human activities. So if we call children happy, it's based on hope. It means to say, in other words, I see this child, he seems to be going and doing the correct things. Maybe when he'll grow up, he'll do things. But since children are like the epitome of people that don't do things, that's why we like them. And therefore, children are not happy. So this is a very This is a very clear statement of the difference between happiness, the state or the feeling, and happiness, the doing things. That's the same question of, are the people that live in wherever happy? Well, if they don't do anything, then probably not. Even if they don't know that they should be doing anything, so they don't say it. What's the story with this? So what do we learn from this according to our question of what should we do with adults? Oh, this is also why you should never be a bocher. Why? Because that's I don't know why. The children are not happy, well, they're not miserable either. Right? Why not?
Bochurim are permanently miserable.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out something here. I didn't ever say Yeah, children are not happy, but we hope they'll be happy. We could call them happy. They're not miserable, obviously, but they're just nothing because they're not doing. They're sort of in a state of potential.
And why? And holidays are an attempt to establish potentiality in children.
No, the happiness of the holidays, right? They have similar or whatever it is only states of happiness, right? It's not they're not doing for children for sure. They're just getting stuff, right? And getting stuff, getting gifts doesn't make you happy. Can't make you happy because it's the opposite of a doing. It's a being, and the more you're being, or the more passive you are, the less happy you are. This is why poor people are not happy, are not blessed, right? Only chashiv kames. And traditional languages say because it's a makabel, because it's b'chinas nuk, because it's a nekayva. because he's only receiving and not giving. That's like, but in our, which is corresponds to this language, which is you're only matter and not form. You could say you're only getting or being and having and not doing anything, and that is not some. Even if it's pleasurable, you might have pleasure in some sense, but it's not happiness, and you actually end up being miserable. I mean, I think this is obvious. I mean, again, sometimes we seem to like forget about.
We do have it, but it's distorted through a realm of productivity instead of a realm of action, right?
Okay.
We always discuss happy people are productive
is a weird
people.
thing because productivity means that you're not, like we said, then the
Means you're aiming towards a product, right?
You should be active, not productive. I mean, again, maybe the productive is like a byproduct of it sometimes, but being productive.
Or it imitates action in a way that might.
Productivity is in virtue of slaves, not of free people.
Right, but productivity and you can say that children maybe are productive but not acting.
Children don't do anything; they don't produce either. They
produce themselves. I mean, they're the ones that are doing this real self-creation.
I don't think they're not doing anything bad, but they're not doing anything good either. They're not doing anything. They're not doing anything bad, but they're not doing anything at all. Like that's why children are innocent. We have this whole a vision. I mean, it's true. I mean, obviously, children are innocent in some sense. You can't take them to court. Can't have responsibility and so on, and this becomes an ideal for people who are looking for the passive ideal. But it's very nice to not do anything bad. But the worst thing is not to do anything for an adult, like relative to what an adult, what a full human being, which is another word for an adult human being, has to do. So to be a child is never going to be good, not because sort of it's true that he's not doing anything. Maybe it's better that's better than doing bad things, but it's not doing anything.
The ultimate thing in that sense is not to exist.
Yeah. Children seem to be close to that. Right.
Thumbnail. Children don't exist.
Oh, they're not happy. It's good enough. So if you're not happy, if you want to be happy, don't be like a child. Be the least childlike you can be. Now, the other side of children is active people, and I think really this is true. I mean, this is why it's weird, right? People talk about freedom, like political freedom, as being important for happiness. This is like what the American Revolution is based on. And it's a very weird thing because it's not true. Not true in the way that most people think about happiness. Like Aristotle, like Sardanapalus, which was some king of Persia that had a lot of money, says everyone thinks like him, and which is that happiness is to have a bunch of money and slaves and who knows what else. And that is a happiness worthy of slaves. And it's really like true. Like most people don't seem to really think of political freedom as something that will make them more happy. Most people seem to be very happy if you give them bread and circus. And then we pretend that the political freedom was just a way to vote ourselves bread and circus. But that's not true. You don't even need to vote for that. You can get that. You'll probably get more of it without voting for complicated political reasons. But when you vote, and like you get some of it from the act of voting, and then the politician doesn't actually have to give you any bread and circuses, because the voting is the circus. It's not bread, but it's at least a circus.
They promise you bread and substitute it with a circus.
But the ancient idea is that if you're not a man, right, if you're not acting, and if part of being human is to be politically active, which means humans live in societies, which means you need to be in some sense in charge of your society. Of course, most people will not be that. I mean, there's Athens, they thought that all adult citizens are sort of leading this thing, and that's true in some limited sense, but you have to have very, very small cities for this to work, and very limited amount of adult males which are doing that. But that would be the happy people, at least for the political life. There's contemplative life, which is different in Shmone, but for the political life. And that is only makes any sense if you understand that happiness is not having everything you want. Happiness is being the one that does all the good things. And I think this is why, nowadays people would call this something like disempowerment and empowerment. When you're disempowered, you're not happy in that, at least in the sense.
Potentially.
Qua being a child. Like a child can't be happy. He could be, how do you say, something like...
joyful and sad.
It could be even joyful. It could be pleasured. It could be fulfilled. Like it could be having what he needs. Misupak, how do you say? the word in English. You could like have what you need, or you cannot. You could not lack anything, but you're not going to be happy. Just because you're not in charge of your fate, you're not doing anything. Your life is you're not really alive. And the opposite way, when you are doing something, when you're the in charge, right? Being the boss sometimes in charge, but when you're in charge, then you're happy, as in the way that humans should be happy. And that doesn't mean you're going to have more money or more things. That's why, that's why this is a very basic human thing. If you live by this, you eat what you made, not the eating that's pleasure. This is like part of this one big story, which is a story of activity. I'm a man which provides for himself or provides for his family. And even if you have less money, it's better. This is why the worst thing is to ask for donations. Or to live off that. The worst in the sense of the saddest, right? Which is why, in order to be fully happy, you need to have political power. Because otherwise, I am driving on a street, which is not part of my activity. It was given to me. It's something that I have, and it's beautiful that I live in America, which has these wide streets, so you don't even have to focus on the road, because you could swerve for 5 feet in each direction and nothing happens. And one of the great luxuries of living in the United States, and no other country in the world works like this.
What, shoulders?
Yeah.
Whoops.
But like everywhere else, you have to actually drive in a line. They didn't make the roads that wide. But anyways, that's something that you have, and that's something unless you're
people are reminded on the outer bridge, by the way, what life could be like.
There's something. But that's why. But if you would if you would imagine like a real democracy, where like every adult citizen is in some sense the one paving the streets and deciding, and paving is not enough because you have to have human ownership, right? You have to be sort of the one deciding and deliberating over how wide the streets should be. Then you would have happiness instead of only pleasure or fate.
Passive enjoyment.
Consumerist happy. Consumerism is like literally the word. Right, and that's why to the extent that we don't have that, we're not happy. And that's, at least males, I don't know, they need that. How did I get to this whole shit? That's why children are unhappy, and the same thing with Yantu. And that's why, very good. So that's why, now, I still don't have a good theory for why you're not allowed to be in between. But anyways, children, at least they're not doing anything, so they're not happy, but they're not miserable. And adults, if they're not doing something and then like they're slaves, then they're going to be miserable. And if they're doing something this is another thing. Doing doesn't need to be, and there's different levels of doing. You could be doing the best thing for you, which is contemplation, or you could be acting politically, which everyone who's a father is acting politically in a certain sense. Everyone that has a family, everyone that's in charge of anything else is acting politically. You're teaching your kids about the akl and the honey, and now you're being active, which is what makes people happy, which is what happiness is. Might not be the
problem for Prakim and the holidays is that there's nothing for them to do.
At least a human, exactly, but it's at least a human activity. But if you're somewhere in between, so you're a person that
can teach children but isn't teaching them.
Yeah, something like that. This is the part that I'm missing here with the theory. I don't have the puzzle piece that I'm missing somehow. But if you're someone that should be, can't be, and like who gives this should? I don't know. It's a nature. Like at some age, when you're 13, the bar mitzvah, you should be doing things already, and then you're not doing anything. So then, all this like energy. Well, this is like again, it's
unactualized potential.
Yeah, and all this energy starts going on, and it's either reflected against yourself, which is when you become a bit, where it's working on yourself, or it's reflected to your parents and you get angry, or it's some other game that you're playing.
You're either a frustrated child or a frustrated adult.
Something like that. A frustration is something like activity that doesn't have what to act on, or doesn't have where to act. And then you're very sad. And then what's the weirdest thing is, this is to complete my criticism of modern Judaism and modern world or whatever. The word is not Judaism, the word is adult development, right? Because I have to say this, because like we said, there's like a sort of ideal, right? And for sure, for Aristotle, it's like some kind of ideal, process or story of humans growing. It's fine to be a baby and you grow up and you become a man. And this whole story, that's why in some sense it makes sense to say that children are happy because there's lifetime, like we said. Another thing that he says is that you're only happy over a whole lifetime. That's the human activity, growing up and dying. But that's another. But anyways, and that's like the normal, the correct way, or the complete way. And which means that the final state, sort of the best state, right, the peak, we have this idea of peak years, and afterwards you go down and you're not. Right, there's another thing, there's no steiging here, there's only a limited amount of steiging because there's a certain perfection, there's humans at their best, which is sort of middle age, and the traditional classical way of thinking about it. Afterwards your life is over. Now it's over, nothing wrong with it, but you're going to be doing less things, which means you're going to be less happy. And then you're going to die. And it's a question if you're happy when you're dead, but you're probably not happy when you're dead. He talks about this. And there's another thing we try to deny. We have this 70-year-old people pretending to still steig. You don't steig when you're 70. No steig. You shouldn't. It's not possible. But also, if we assume that there's some kind of ideal human who's like an adult, who is a father and has some kind of ownership over something in the world and is doing things, and that is sort of the peak, right? Of course, like I said, there's always this contemplative life, which is really what we care about, which is somehow to decide if all of this has to be fit in here. But meaning it's not really part of this story that I'm saying, but it can't be totally disconnected. In other words, just like everything else, you can't be sick and have contemplation, right? And you can't be a sick human in the moral sense and have contemplation. It's not going to work. The best time to contemplate is after you have kids. According to this theory, it's a problem. It doesn't really work that way.
But only happy people prophecy and people who are...
And then if you're happy, you don't need prophecy, right? And this is one of the tragedies. Now we have this ideal of adult development, which is something entirely disconnected from action, and something entirely disconnected from this.
It also idealizes, in some sense, the American notion of freedom as being central, as being
It's teenage freedom,
or young adult freedom,
self-centered,
right.
Or teenage, which is nowadays teenage. I've noticed that it goes on until you're 40. After that, I'm not sure.
But it definitely privileges potential and things that you have.
The culture until you're 40, you're still a teenager. People, it's crazy. And what is that? I'm talking about, if you think about good people, right? People that are they're working on something or they're working on themselves. But what is this? Is it just a kind of freedom to do whatever I want? Or it's freedom?
It's also a freedom that's also seen to become more acute with having, right? So if a person, most people describe their 20s as the best period in their life because they have money and that's not demanded towards any, let's say, other purpose. It's a freedom that's also enabled by possession. Right? I have independence, I have money, I have things that allow me to have...
In so-called Ruchnius, we have the same kind of view of this being the idea.
Sure, I could learn any Masechta, I was able to whatever.
Right, and I could go to Uman for Rosh Hashanah, whatever. And these things seem to be nice things, but they seem to not be real actions for some reason. I'm not sure why.
Well, you also aim towards a state and not towards an activity.
Maybe.
There's a...
But my criticism of this not being something that... I would say one thing, it's not teaching, and you should never be in a state that...
The point of Uman is for people to feel tshuva, or to feel something, and not to do something.
I guess that's true. But also, I'm trying to think, because my criticism is something like... it's based on my state of life also, but my criticism is something like anything you could do as a bacher must be fake. And it can't be that the biggest ideal is to keep people are doing that in some sense and sort of fight with you being a father and a teacher and a business owner or whatever, other things that people do, husbands, things like that. And we have this idea of that being that way. But then I think that's not a good criticism because, I mean, if you think of the contemplative life, it's the best kind of life. That is not the household or political life. And yeah, maybe it means being a monastic. And then are monastics such bad people? They're not passive people. They're supposed to be active people, doing the best activity all the time. That's definitely not what we're doing, but that's what it should be. So my theory is not such a good criticism because of that. But there's still true that there's something wrong. So what I was thinking on something else. So I was there. I forgot what I was going to say. So this is why I think that I don't know if this is what to be here. Even in the intellectual life, even the contemplative life, you're never allowed to be anything either other than a student or a teacher. There isn't any state in between. I mean, I don't know in philosophy what they talk about this. I know in Torah how they talk about this, which is, and there's some traditional statements that's precisely to this effect, like this kind of Talmud Chuvah situation or eltering a man or something that you should never be. Why? Because again, even for the contemplation, you either be taught or you're teaching, which is the most complete state probably, because you're literally actualizing your own intellect and other people's intellect or something like that. But I think
that's also the politics of intellectual activity, right?
Meaning
the teacher is the politician, is the intellectual politician.
He's teaching because his teaching is not something that happens in himself. His intellect is not something that happens in himself. It's something that exists.
It's a different transmission structure, which is why it's still an activity that occurs within it.
Because he's still a social animal, because he's acting within a society.
Yeah, even though the politician aims at things outside of himself, while the teacher aims at something that's more trying to bring the student into himself.
An activity of the soul, or the student's activity of the soul. Right, not at things. And that seems to be better. So there seems to be something very bad in the Cherev al-Abad, we have all these things. There seems to be something very bad with someone who learns by himself. Although the whole point of learning is that it's something for yourself, in some sense. It still seems very bad. And I'm not happy with saying that it's bad because of the need for a social justice, because you always have to be altruistic.
No, but because of the madati harbim beis type of thing, right?
Right, and then you end up still being for yourself. I think it's bad because it's less complete learning. There's something in the formula of what you're doing when you're learning which is not steiging. It's either thinking, I don't have the complete idea of this, but I could tell that it's wrong. Even if people say, well, it seems like, maybe it's the best way you can learn is when you're all alone or something like that, which is another questionable thing. Well, maybe it's true, maybe not. Maybe the best way to learn is in conversation, and the fact that many people are bad at that is because they're actually
maybe the ideal way to learn is by teaching.
Yeah, something like that.
It also takes a certain crystallization of thought.
Teaching not in the sense of product, right? We have this weird idea nowadays of teaching being another product where I somehow give you something.
No, but meaning that I learn the most by having to teach.
No, but even that still sounds low. But that learning means a kind of conversation.
A way of thinking. There's a way of thinking when you teach. Yeah. That's not present when you...
Thinking is an activity, and it's again not something self-focused. It's not working on myself. And
working on doing the teaching.
Exactly. When I'm teaching with someone else, I'm also not selling him something. There is not a product that I'm selling to the student, and the student is definitely not I'm not making it a student, so he's also not my product. There's a way of thinking that's like that. That's also not correct. I did have a class once that title was something like "Students are the products of teachers," so I don't remember. But anyways, according to now, it's not correct. Remember that? And then it wasn't Bark. Because then I was trying to say that students are the product it was versus a book being the product. The books are totally irrelevant.
Mm.
But it's not almost, it's probably not contradicting to what I was saying. Not a product, the activity of the student, right? And that is an activity that happens, it's not necessarily a solitary activity, it happens maybe with others also. Like there are solitary activities and there are communal activities, and do we know that learning is a solitary activity? I don't know. It's a solitary activity in the sense that the sort of the matter in which it happens is each person's mind. But that could be true for eating also. I mean, we there's obviously eating as a communal activity, although the food only goes into one person at a time. But it's different. There's something called eating with you, and it's a better kind of eating, or so hopefully, or like playing a game, or
yeah. Very few fine dining restaurants give people cubicles.
Yeah, almost everything.
To focus on the food.
Almost everything is better with other people, or many things. And thinking is, in a certain sense, even more than that, because it can be something that is happening, that I'm doing, so sort of with my thought, with my intellect, with my mind, we could say, and at the same time I'm doing it with you. This is why the best love is the love between people who think together. Right? Because they're literally doing the same thing together and separately at the same time. They're more separate and more together. Anyways, and this is all very different from Bucharest thinking. And that's why that is not what you should be doing. And practically, everyone should try to as quickly either move from being a student to a teacher or back. I don't know, maybe you should stop being a teacher and be a student. But you should be one of these two states. I don't think there's any good state in between us.
Being a friend?
A friend is another word for someone that's...
Both a student and a teacher?
Yeah. I think that friend... I mean, I always say this story about Chavrusa. My experience is like this. Maybe I'm just egoistic and wrong. But my experience is that Chavrusa is just a private teacher. And sometimes it's one... Chavrusa is always the teacher. Sometimes it switches over by minute or by day. But there isn't really any equal state. Friends is like a statement of like we should always be friends with our teachers and students. In the sense of we should not learning precisely because learning has to be an activity in both minds.
Done together, okay.
Right. So we always right. If we talk about when I say friend, I mean in the sense of respect, right? Since learning is not a product and it's not something that the teacher is pouring into the head of the student, or the student buying from the teacher, right? It's always the student as it's philosophical learning, right? There might be other kind of learning. It's always the student as a independent, right? As someone free, as someone who is using his final kind of power, his final kind of activity, which stops at him, and at the same time being taught by the teacher, or by the thoughts that the teacher is telling him, or by the conversations that they're having. So that means that there's always an equalization in that kind of teaching. That's why when the student asks a question, the teacher always is going to have to take that question as if he's his friend. You can never say, well, you're just my student, so your questions are fake because you're stupid. Well, it's true that you're stupid, but I can't teach you in that sense, not you. Right? Because I could only teach you as a human being who is sort of capable of thought. And capable of thought means that I have to respect you as if you're my teacher, or as if you're someone who, that not mean you're right. Because of course, the activity of thought is the furthest thing from having correct opinions, which are mistakes. Which is why we're totally not interested in that. And the moment you understand that, then it's always friends. That's what Socrates always said, call the students as friends and so on. So in that sense we should be friends, but I don't think there's a state of friends which is like we both have opinions and we respect each other's opinions. Well, what's that? Why would you do that? Oh, that's not a doing, basically. You can't do it. You can sleep it. Decide that I respect you in my sleep. No problem. What are we doing now? Yeah, okay, that's the story. So today we learned why, let me make a summary. Today we learned why happiness is a thing that we do and not a thing that we feel or have. This is why children are not happy. This is why Yom Tovim are not what children are not actually the ones that do Yom Tovim the best. They might be the receivers of what their parents do, but the people that are not parents nor children, they got stuck because they're
not doing anything.
Worse than children who are at least innocent from their not doing, because they're supposed to not do anything, and you're supposed to do something and you're not doing it, so you're probably even more sad. This is called teenagers, and it's consumerism, and it's what runs America and the rest of the Chassidish and Litvish world for a long time now. That's why everyone is sad.
Quick escalation.
Well, they are. We should stop doing this, and we should stop focus. We should definitely not work on ourselves, which is the biggest messed up thing. We should just do things and do good things. And that's the whole thing. We should wake up and do good things. And of course, the best thing is to learn or think. And it's so good because we can do it with other people at the same time we have to do it with ourselves. We could be friends with our teachers.